Says we're streaming.
Okay, we should be good now.
Okay, awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and call to order the Planning Commission meeting for tonight, May 19th, 2020. We have 5 members of our Planning Commission present tonight. Commissioners Shelton and Padone are both excused for the evening. Our first item on our agenda tonight is regarding the minutes from our previous meeting of May 5th. Any discussion or motion for this consent item?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes from May 5th, 2020.
Excellent. Motion by Commissioner England.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Thomas. Any discussion to the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Excellent. We are unanimous. Moving along, our first public hearing tonight is the DMAC subdivision, 7494 South, 1300 West, in the preliminary subdivision plat. It's 2 lots on 0.61 acres in an R18B zone. All West Real Estate. Jerry Dinkelman is our applicant. Mr. Dinkelman, I saw him here a second ago. Let's see if he's still around. All right, you actually have an open microphone, Mr. Dinkelman, so the floor is yours if you want to share your thoughts there for us.
Okay, can you hear me? I'm sorry, I'm new to the layout here, so.
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks for joining us.
Okay, there was an existing 100-year-old dilapidated home, which was on the property, and we're asking now to just divide that in half and within the 75-foot minimum required in the zone, and just put two new homes on there.
Well, it was short and succinct. Anything else you want to add?
No, relatively easy. I think curb and gutters is in, and we're ready to go, I think, once we get approval.
Okay. Well, we will ask if anybody has any questions for the applicant today. Anything from the Planning Commission? No? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Dinkelman. We will go ahead and turn this over to staff. I believe, Kent, you've got this today, right?
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Okay. Yeah, the floor is all yours.
So hopefully you can see what I'm seeing. So this is located off of 1300 West. It's kind of north of the sewer treatment plant on the west side of 1300 West. There are currently 4 parcels that comprise this proposed 2-lot subdivision. So the proposal is to, with these 4 parcels, make 2 lots. And this is a preliminary subdivision plat. It's also a major subdivision because some portion of the property will be formally dedicated to 1300 West. Therefore, it needs to go before the Planning Commission. As Mr. Dinkelman mentioned, that the old house will be demolished, and then there'll be 2 lots that will be split east and west. So there'll be a lot on the north side and a lot on the south side. And it meets the future land use and the current zoning. Here's an aerial view. And then this is the proposed preliminary plat. There's some cosmetic corrections that need to be corrected before the final plat is approved, but we wanted to bring this before you to advance this project and not cause any unnecessary delay to the applicant. So I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have at this time.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Thomas.
Yes. Is the property going to be okay for the widening of 1300 West?
Yes, engineering has looked at that, and this will be actually a benefit that some of the property will be formally dedicated to the city.
Is that happening now, or is that going to happen after the structures are in?
Oh, it's formally happening with this
'Cause
plat,
that's what we're okay.
but I think it's already widened this area.
Okay. Because that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up to the public. This is our first public hearing. If you have any questions or anything you want to say about this, please feel free to come forward. You'll have 3 minutes. Just for our purposes, make sure that you do identify yourself by name so that we can check on that. And I don't see anybody raising hands or making notice. Am I missing anything? We'll go ahead and close the public hearing for this item and bring this back to the Planning Commission for further discussion or a possible motion. Commissioner England?
I just wanted to voice my opinion that I think this is a great improvement. Anything other than what's there now, the neighbors should be ecstatic about. So that is a dilapidated little lot. And if anybody wants to say anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll make a motion.
For it.
Based on the information and findings set forth in this staff report and upon the evidence and explanations received today, I move that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary subdivision plat for DMAC subject to adherence to all current City of West Jordan code requirements.
Motion by Commissioner England,
I'll second that.
seconded by Commissioner Hatch. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thanks, guys. We are unanimous on this. Thanks, Mr. Dinkelman, for your presentation and for wanting to improve the streetscape there for us. Moving along, we'll move on to the next item, which is a text amendment. So amending the 2009 City Code Title 13 to include micro wireless facility and small wireless facility in Chapter 16 with low power radio service antennas. It says citywide applicability in the entire city. Obviously, Ray McCandless, this is your presentation. You're on the floor, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Back in 2018, the Utah State Legislature adopted what's called the Small Wireless Deployment Act, which now requires cities to allow small and micro wireless telecommunication facilities to be located in our public right-of-ways. So currently, the city code only allows the micro and the small telecommunication facilities on private property and not in the public way. So in order to comply with state code, we're writing this ordinance, we're proposing this ordinance to bring us in line with what's the state legislature has adopted. So what we're not talking about are these kinds of structures where you have the big top hat, and you see these all over the place, but the top hat platform with the monopole and maybe some other antennas below that. But we're looking at something that's a little smaller. And this just gives you kind of an idea of the types of facilities that we might be looking at. So again, these are located in the public way. So they might be located in park strips, or if there's additional room behind the back of the sidewalk that might be able to accommodate these kinds of facilities, and that's where they would be located. So we've got, this is just another example of what they might look like. You can see there's kind of a base here, a pole, and then this is where the antennas are. So this is all the electrical equipment that's associated to it. Notice that there are no above ground utility lines, but they're fairly sleek, and you can paint them whatever color you want. But this is kind of what we have in mind for the types of facilities that the ordinance would allow. This would be like what we call a new or a freestanding pole. This is just some other examples. This facility is basically a replacement light pole. You can see the light standard out here with the Cobra head, and then the antennas and some of the other equipment's located here with some additional equipment here. It's another pole right here with kind of the same things, but this is located kind of in a downtown area of another city. We're also, another type of installation would be on on just existing poles. So it'd be like your existing power poles or existing light poles. These tend to be a little more cluttered, and they're kind of hard to look like a really clean install without replacing the pole. But here are a couple of examples of what we might be looking at with the antennas here. That's in what we call a cantenna, or it's basically a shroud at the top of the pole. There's some things that obviously can be done here, like reducing the amount of conduit that extends from here to the boxes. But again, these are a little more difficult to manage. Our ordinance has a number of different types of installation that are shown in them. And one of those is mounted to an existing utility pole, like we saw on that last slide. One of the issues that we have run into, I think we sent this ordinance out to some of the carriers, and I think one of them responded and indicated where these antennas would be best suited. And they said that it's pretty rare to have the antennas below power lines. They're typically up on top of those poles as shown here, with the electrical equipment shown attached to the pole as we saw on that last slide. The other type, so those are two similar types of installations. It's just that this one's on top, and then this one shows the antennas mounted below the lines. This is another type of an installation where you might have that you saw on one of the other slides. It's got a Cobra head or a light extending off of the pole. Typically, those antennas would not be below the light. They would typically be above the light, because the lights and the pole themselves acts as interference on the pole. Okay. Hang on for a second. Let's try that again. Okay. This would be over on the right-hand side, just also what you saw in the slides would be just a new freestanding pole. As I mentioned, we did send the ordinance out to some of the different carriers, and they came back with some comments on it. And there's a couple of things that they notice, and one of the things is that they have some separation requirements from any power lines just for safety. And there's typically like a 10-foot high separation between any antenna and the lines themselves. If the antenna was located on top of the pole, then there would have to be that 10-foot separation again from those power lines to where that antenna would be. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work on revising what these diagrams look like. Again, putting the pole in, or the antennas inside the pole down below the light may not work for the providers. Again, they'd much rather see them up on top, where they're just not going to get that interference. And so there are a couple of things in here that they brought to our attention that we need to do a little additional work on. They also had some other issues. When we look at the state code, it sets the maximum size of the maximum size for the electrical equipment and for the antennas. But the industry is saying that those dimensions that are included in state law aren't quite big enough. So I think one of the things that we need to do is take that back and hammer that out just to make sure that what our code reads is something that can be technically done. So those maximum sizes for those, again, are set and established in state code. But I think one of the carriers was looking for something that's just slightly bigger. So we need to kind of take a look at that. Given that there are some kind of outstanding questions or issues, I think what we would like from the Planning Commission is for you to continue this item till I think the June 16th meeting, and just to give us an opportunity to meet with the telecom providers and just make sure that our standards will fit with what they can technically accomplish. So from the Planning Commission this evening, I think what we'd like from you is just to see, have your thoughts and just see if we're kind of headed in the right direction for this, or if you see anything that's kind of glaring in those the code requirements, and I can bring that up if you want me to. That would be great.
Okay, any questions for staff? Commissioner Hatch and Commissioner England.
Go ahead, Commissioner Hatch.
Thank you. Sorry, I was having trouble finding the unmute button. So it looks like this, the height that is in code is 50 feet. So this would be higher than 50 feet. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, the actual height of the poles could not, if it was a new pole, could not exceed 50 feet. That's set by state law.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner England.
I had a lot of questions, but I think what Ray's recommending that we continue this is probably the most prudent thing to do. A lot of these are just technical questions such as an IER or an RF, cooling fans with decibels higher than 30. A lot of this is just technical stuff, not necessarily aesthetically Planning Commission type stuff. I realize that we need to approve this or make a recommendation, but I think it's probably best to let them sort it out, like Ray says, and just move this on. So not necessarily a specific question, just I guess what I'm trying to say is I agree that we should probably continue this.
Okay, is there anything else that anybody wants to add before we do a quick public hearing on this, and then we can entertain the motion to continue? Commissioner Allen.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Commissioner England. I had a laundry list, and postponing is prudent. One thing I would recommend for staff, I notice under criteria 1 on the discussion item, the first sentence says, although there are no goals or policies specific to wireless telecommunications facilities, the general plan encourages regular updates to the city code to keep it current. I would encourage staff to go back and think of a handful of goals that would be reasonable, that we could work toward. Otherwise, we may find ourselves just at the mercy of these wireless carriers coming and saying, well, I need a box this big, so we put it into the code. And I think what you said, Mr. McCandless, on here earlier about the existing pole and how cumbered it looked, or encumbered it looked, that's a great thing for us maybe to start with and say, let's make sure we have attractive looking poles. How can we do that? Well, here's a few things that we can put into place. And certainly we're not going to have that type of a stay into every part of these poles. Obviously, we need to understand how different communication companies are going to utilize them, and how what kind of space they're going to need. But at least we have some grounding to say, well, here's what we want it to look like. Here's how we want it to improve our city. And I would recommend that at least as a starting point.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay. I don't see Duncan on here. It looks like his technical difficulties may have never been resolved. So I'll just ask you the question here, Ray. With the list of questions that both Corbin and Ammon have, since we're going to be ultimately postponing this one or continuing it until next month, but it'd be appropriate for them to just email their questions directly to Julie so that they could be included in the minutes, but also that way you can just kind of address them as you're doing your research for next month.
No, I think that's a great idea. I would really appreciate any comments that you have so that we can address those before the meeting.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be missing anything based on open meeting, but it sounds like we should be okay. Commissioner England.
My question is just kind of one holistic question, which is the design techniques. You know, do we want AT&T, who is the only one that responded, apparently, at least the notes that I've gotten, do we want them pretty much writing our policy, or, but at the same time, we've got to put something together that works technically for all these wireless carriers. Otherwise, we're not going to have anything in our city. So I just want to leave it up to the professionals. I don't have any specific questions. Just, does it work for AT&T or does it work for all of the carriers is pretty much my question.
Yeah, I think with what Commissioner Allen was suggesting, where we encourage staff to write up some stated goals, and then we give them another month to communicate with some of the other carriers. I agree. That way we can hopefully avoid having a single entity weighing in on this, but rather have multiple invested parties providing their opinion, and hopefully that they will jive just a little bit better with what our stated goals and policies might be. Commissioner Thomas, did you have a comment?
Well, it kind of goes right along with what has already been said, but I would like to see something approach some of the other carriers so we don't have a proprietary problem where just one single entity is allowed to do something and then it kind of eliminates the rest of them.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, one of the issues is that state code does it is very specific on making sure that there's no there are no issues or no I don't know what the word is for it, but that it just treats all the carriers fairly and with equity. So we just need to make sure that the code does that. And we did, just so you know, that we did get some other comments from one of the other carriers, but all those comments were basically similar to or the same that was in the AT&T.
Okay, thank you. Well, unless anyone has any additional objection, let's hold the public hearing for this, so we can move past that part and then we can work on a motion for moving forward. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and open this up for public hearing. If anybody is here to speak on this item, knowing that we will be making a recommendation shortly to postpone this item, please do so now. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on this item. Bring this back to the Planning Commission for a motion.
I'll make the motion. I'll make the motion that we go ahead and postpone this until June 16th at our meeting then.
I'll second that.
All right, motion by Commissioner Thomas, seconded by Commissioner England. I would just add to make sure that Commissioner Allen and anybody else who has additional questions that they may have thought of that were not asked out loud in this meeting, that they just email them to Julie Davis for inclusion in our minutes, and as well as further research from staff. Any other discussion to the motion?
I'm sorry.
Okay, is it acceptable, Commissioners Thomas and England, with that
Yes.
addition? All right.
Yes.
With no further discussion, all
Commissioner
those in
Quinney?
favor that we postpone this until June 16th? Aye.
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 Commissioner England, you're holding up your finger. You're on mute, buddy.
I think Ray was trying to speak before we voted. I don't know what he had to say.
Ray, did you have something else you wanted to add before we conclude?
I just wanted to make sure with Duncan that June 16th meeting was okay.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any opposed to the motion? Okay, we are unanimous on postponing this item until June 16th. Moving along to our final item for the evening, we have another, where did it go? Another text amendment amending the 2009 city code allowing tattoo and body engraving services as a conditional use in the SC3 zone and in the CCC zone with citywide applicability. City of West Jordan is the applicant. I know Larry's not around, so I'm assuming that Ray, you've got this, or is Duncan handling it?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay.
I'm just getting set up here. There you go. So this request was initiated by the city council, which directed staff to take a look at the city code and then determine the appropriate locations for what are defined in the city code as tattoo and body engraving services. The current code defines tattoo businesses and body engravings as a personal service establishment for furnishing tattoos and body piercing on the premises. This definition excludes permanent cosmetics when done in association with a permitted personal care service, such as a beauty shop or nail salon. I believe this question was initially raised during a council meeting from a person who does tattoos as part of reconstructive work for things like mastectomies or other medical conditions. And I don't know if that person's attending the meeting, but the zoning administrator has taken a look at it. And if it's for medical, if it's medical tattooing, then it can occur just under the definition of what we call a medical service, which is allowed in 13 of our different zoning districts. So the definition for that medical service is an establishment providing therapeutic, preventative, or corrective medical treatment on an outpatient basis by physicians, dentists, or other practitioners of the medical or healing arts. So we already have that in place. And one of the things that you'll be looking at is whether or not you would recommend to the council that the tattoo and body engraving service should be allowed in the city as one thing. And then if so, what are the appropriate zones for this kind of a business? I think when we went through and took a look at a bunch of other cities or some other cities, and it's kind of a mixed bag, because you'll see West Valley, South Jordan, Draper, they're permitted, but they're permitted in commercial and some of the manufacturing zones. In Harriman, Holiday, Cottonwood Heights, they're not permitted. But in these other cities, again, they're permitted in their manufacturing zones and also some of their commercial zones. One of the things that we were looking at is, I think just over time, tattoo businesses have kind of changed in the last 20 years. I think they're a little different. But I think that it's important to keep them in locations where they're basically surrounded by commercial businesses with a lot of activity, rather than in an industrial area where they basically shut down. They're kind of far away from places. And so we thought that, the commercial areas would probably be the best bet for these kinds of businesses. We settled on 2 zones, and one of those zones is what we call the city center core zone, which is basically in the block that is where the Jordan School District offices are. And the other would be in the SC3 zoning districts, which is basically part Jordan Landing. We thought that those were kind of far enough away from residential areas where it's not going to be an issue with that respect. And it's not going to be an issue over in Jordan Landing because it's basically surrounded by freeways and the airport, with the exception of the residential area that's just on the north side. So that's our recommendation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for staff? For myself personally, I actually attended the city council meeting when the shop owner from, I think he's in South Jordan, came in and basically said, hey, I don't get why this isn't allowed in the services that he provides. I think this is a great fit, especially in the two zones that have been recommended by staff. Are there any other questions or comments for staff?
I was hoping to maybe
Commissioner
hear a little bit more of the detail on the areas. So we're talking about these two, the SC3 and then the city center zone, which I agree. I think they're good fits. I'm still a little bit new as far as looking at the city maps and the zoning maps and understanding where everything is. I could see someplace like the location there on 90th and Redwood, right around there, being a good spot where it's primarily business oriented. Is that within these areas, or what? I guess what other parts of the city are considered SC3 and CCC?
Those are basically, let me just show you here. I can bring this up. So here's Jordan Landing right here. This is the airport. If you can see my cursor.
I think you got to switch.
You don't have anything on your screen right now. You got to change the screen that you're sharing.
Yeah, okay. Is that better?
See, yep.
There it is.
Can you see it? Okay.
Yep.
So here's Jordan Landing, it's Bangerter Highway 78. This is the airport right here. So the SC3 zone is in the cities, is basically right in through here. You can see that. And then I'll zoom to the city center core, which is the CCC district. And this is the only area in the city where the CCC zone exists. And you had another question about another area off of Redwood?
I was just generally thinking of areas where there's a lot of business located. And I was thinking 90th and Redwood happens to be one of those areas.
Yeah, the issue that you run into is that if you allow it in one zone, then that use is allowed in those same zones all over the city. And I think one of the reasons, if, for example, here's 90th and Redwood Road, a lot of these areas are zoned what we call SC2, which is a community shopping center zone. We've got planned community zones. So if you allowed it in that SC2 zone, then it would be allowed in other SC2 zones, which are generally located fairly close to residential uses.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was after.
Ray, can you pull back and just show us an overlay of the city just on SC2 zones throughout the city? Just so we can get an idea of where the other, because I don't actually have a real big issue with SC2 as long as it doesn't have a major conflict with other areas. Like, I mean, the Redwood and 90th is a great spot. And then I'm not necessarily worried that it's next to residential just simply because, it's screened from behind. So it's not like they're going to be able to see them. And so I'm just curious what other SC2 zones we might have that might have a bit of a conflict than we do at 90th and Redwood.
Yeah, they're kind of scattered all over the city. So here's one right here. I just saw another one. There's SC2 that's like right here. So this is one that I was kind of talking about. It's where it's kind of wrapped with commercial uses. Another one would be, let's see, here where the Smiths is, out on 5600 West. This is all SC2 here. There's some SC2, that's freeway.
I think I have to agree.
Here's some right here. See that little strips, that commercial center.
I think the SC2 zone makes sense as well. I don't see tattoo parlors as being a bad influence or bringing a bad influence. to me, they're normalized. It's not a rough crowd anymore that gets a tattoo or a piercing. It's my grandchildren, it's my children, it's my neighbors. So I'm okay with an SC2 zone.
Especially if it's permitted and you can actually kind of go over the requirements. I think I agree with the SC2 also.
Here's a couple of other SC2 zones just up on 70th and Redwood. Here where the Smiths is also SC2.
Yeah, see that area right there on the south side of 70th, that back door to my neighborhood, my neighborhood, and I just wouldn't have a problem if there was a nicely established tattoo parlor right there.
But again, if it's
would probably increase the business there over what we have there right now. So I think for my part, I would recommend adding SC2 as a permitted zone, especially as Commissioner Thomas said, because then it allows us to have control over what it looks like and through the DRC and so on. So.
So are you saying permitted or conditional use? Because the way the ordinance is drafted now, SC3 and CCC are both being proposed as conditional uses.
I think what we probably got to do is have staff just give us a little bit of a breakdown so we understand the difference between making it permitted and doing it as conditional, so that we know where we can have the control through the DRC for how the establishment looks, as well as the rules that govern the business, the establishment being placed. Is that, did I speak well enough for all of us there? Okay.
With the difference between your permitted and conditional uses is not a lot, because typically if it's a conditional use, it's still allowed in the zone, but the conditions that you put on that is to try to minimize or mitigate impacts to adjoining areas. So you might look at things like hours of operation or parking. It might be what the building looks like. So there are it does allow some control at a little higher level than if it were permitted use. With the conditional use, it does require either an administrative conditional use or through planning commission, through just kind of your typical conditional use.
I think
Okay,
I'd like the
that's
idea
helpful.
of a conditional use in the SC2 in addition to the CCC and the SC3. Gives us just a little bit of control over a few conditions in these areas. I think it's a no-brainer.
I think the other nice thing about the SC2 zone as I'm looking through these maps, they tend to be more of the exterior mall, the standard strip mall. Those are the places I would expect to see these go into. It gives a lot more variance throughout the city to where we can see more of these types of facilities, or at least give one facility more locations to choose from. But finding tenants for some of those and even getting strong tenants in there as anchors for some of those facilities, I think this is a great idea.
All right, Commissioner Thomas, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with Commissioner Allen. So
Okay.
I just want to make sure that we still have a little bit of control over what we allow, but I do agree that we should allow it in some additional areas.
Okay. I do have one other question. We talked about in your presentation, Ray, about some of the other cities using them or permitting them as conditional use in manufacturing zones. And I'm just trying to think outside of the airport area and the part over like at Wells Park, maybe Dannon, if these are even areas that would be of interest for someone to come in and put a tattoo parlor or request to have a tattoo parlor. Is it something else that we want to consider saying, sure, if you want to have it in a manufacturing zone, go right ahead?
Yeah, I mean, the manufacturing districts are kind of scattered throughout the city. I mean, there's one that's located right here, just south of the cemetery. There's another one that's located just south of the airport. And then the other is just down that Bingham industrial area, which is just on the west side of the city. So we've got some M1 that's kind of scattered throughout. So it's kind of up to you if you want to open it up to the manufacturing districts. I think that's up to you.
For my part, I think I would be okay with adding this to the SC2 as well as the M1. Does anybody have any issue with making that a addition on either one of those zones as a recommendation to City Council? Okay.
I would agree with that as well. That's a good suggestion. I can't see that you would want to go into a manufacturing zone, but you never know. And again, I think it should be a conditional use, not a permitted use.
To each their own for sure. Well, let's do the public hearing on this really quickly to see if anybody has anything that they want to say or share, and then we'll bring this back to the Planning Commission for final discussion. So with that being said, is there anybody here here to speak about this item specifically? We've got a new person. I'm not sure who Rob is. Rob, are you here to speak about one of these items today? I can't seem to unmute Rob. Is there anybody else here who's here to speak about this item for tonight regarding the tattoo parlors? Okay, I don't see anybody else. So we'll go ahead and close the public hearing for this item and bring this back to the Planning Commission for any further discussion or possible motion. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and make the motion here. Let me just get back to the top of the page here. Based on the information and findings set forth in the staff report and upon the evidence and explanations today, I move that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to City Council for the SC3 zone. If the CCC zone is recommended, but additionally adding the SC2 as well as the M1 zones. Commissioner England.
I'll
Thank
second
you.
that with the notation that they be conditional use permit.
Oh, yes, thank you. Any discussion to the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, we've got a question from Mr. Langford. Scott, I can't unmute you, but you should be able to undo that yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, great. I appreciate the motion. I just wanted to provide a point of clarification. So this will go forward with your recommendation, but the city council wants to discuss this in a workshop, a work session coming up on the 27th. If they change it substantially or have a substantive change to it, they may ask for it to be remanded back so you can consider their suggestions. But there's no harm in making your motion and forwarding your recommendation at this time. Just wanted to make that clarification that you may see this again.
Okay, sounds good. I look forward to seeing what they had come up with. Should be an interesting conversation going forward. All right, does anybody else have anything else they want to bring up? Oh, by the way, we're unanimous on that last vote. Okay, then we'll go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn. Just one quick point. I have a question for the mayor, but I just wanted to have him hang around afterward for, this isn't not a planning commission question, nor for the record, just wanted to have a question. So Mayor, if you could stick around for a minute, I'd appreciate it. But otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion by several. So we are adjourned. Thank you all for your time tonight, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Just wait till we get that recording stopped there.